Wake up.
I'm not used to this cold.
Not used to this cold.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Please join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Director Ratterman?
Here.
President Davidson?
Here.
Director Thomas?
I'm here.
Director Underhill?
Here.
And Director Strange is absent.
Second item on the agenda is public comment. This time, the members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. No action can be taken on matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per person. Is there any public comment today? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, recognition of JPIA HRLA Bounty Safety Award.
Good afternoon, President Davidson and the rest of the board. Today, I'd like to recognize one of our employees for a safety award, and a reward. He got money, but
Sweet.
he was nominated by one of his employees, and the award was for coordinating with the CAL FIRE to mark and fell trees impacted by, the beetles. So, this quick action, prohibited any fallen trees on district property or district personnel, or even on private property that does not belong to the district. So at this time, I would like to call Ron Rose up here to receive his reward and award. How's that?
All right.
Here you go, Ron. That's that. Thank you for everything, and you can probably take Zach Burke to lunch. He received $75 for this award, so.
From who?
This way. From
This is-
JPIA.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
so, yeah.
Turn the thing around. There you go.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Great job.
Thank you very much.
Great
We
to see
appreciate
you.
it.
Great to see that.
Excuse
Okay.
me. I think this is the second year in a row we have received a safety recognition from HR Levante. So
Yes.
when I saw that in the JPI book, I was very proud of Ron.
No, I appreciate that they make those applications and people get recognition for that. That's great. Okay, we'll move on to new business information discussion regarding update of the district employee policy, section 5,000 compensation, section 8,000 employee separation. Stacy.
Good afternoon. Back again with just the next set of policies, which include the compensation and employment separation. Again, we're working through these policies to update our policy handbook. The rate we're going, hopefully August timeframe, we'll come back with a full employee handbook, but there are still several sections that will come to you as a board for review or comment prior to the full adoption of the employee handbook.
All right.
Any questions or comments?
Any questions by the board?
You want to point out any key changes, any substantial changes, or?
There really weren't any substantial changes. The only difference was we combined a couple policies into one policy for all the proposed ones that are coming. But other than that, that was it.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Stacy, on page 1 of 6, the first sentence there, I'm not sure that I know what the verb pays, such pays, or is that the correct terminology there, that timekeeping issues upon which such pays are dependent?
It's talking about the wages, overtime, and special comp. It's plural for pays.
So pays.
Yeah. Or I can change it to such compensations as well.
Anybody else feel that?
Where are you seeing it, Russ?
On the first sentence, says, this policy outlines how wages, overtime, and special compensation are handled by the district and the associated timekeeping issues upon which such pays are
Or
dependent.
payments?
We can look at different language for
Payments.
that.
Would payments work for you?
Yeah, better than pays. Just seemed odd.
Which such payments are dependent?
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
On page 5,
Uh-huh.
and remind me how longevity pay works?
When you've been here after 15 years of service from your date of hire, you would receive 2.5% of pay of your current step, wherever you are in the range.
Unless you're at a step 0 like me.
Okay, so that would be on top of a merit
Their reg-
increase?
Correct.
Oh, okay. Page 1 of 2, it says that the district pays a full-time employee 86.67 hours per pay period?
Correct.
Okay. Is that a bargained?
That's because we pay twice a month. So if you divide the number of hours into 24 pay periods.
Oh, that'll just
that's the average.
even out the, okay, okay. Just a couple more. Non-disciplinary separation, and that is page 2. And so that means after probation, right?
Let me see.
Any employee separated because of an inability to accommodate after the reasonable accommodation. and-
So, no, the reasonable accommodation is a separate, it would be separate than a probationary or introductory period. A reasonable accommodation is if somebody has a disability or injury and the district cannot reasonably accommodate a work, their job.
Okay. Next to the last, page 1 of 2, it says, whenever in the judgment of the district's governing board of directors, a reduction in the personnel is necessary for economic or operational reasons. Have we ever used that?
I believe so, yes.
Oh, yes, we have?
In 2009, no, 9, 10, I wasn't here, so it doesn't pop out at me. It was somewhere around that time frame. I can't remember.
Okay.
Early 2000s.
All right. And then my last one is on page 1 of 1, 8,000.5. And this is talking about when someone calls for a recommendation. One of the questions that always comes up is, would you re-employ that person? Is that,
It's my recommendation that you do not answer that.
Oh,
Because depending
okay.
on how you answer it, and somebody could say that you're the reason we don't get the job, because if we say no, then that is often is a telling sign to the other person. If you're not able to
right,
employ this
right,
person.
yes,
there's an
absolutely,
issue.
absolutely. Okay, that's it. Thank you, President Davidson.
Okay, so what is our action? Just
No action
no
today,
action?
just comments, so that
Okay.
when we get to the full policy, you won't have to go through each section.
All right, any other comments from the board?
Did you want to discuss that 0 pay step that you were talking about?
I probably deserve less. Anything from the public on this? Okay, thank you, Stacy. Okay, we'll go now to budget workshop discussion regarding fiscal year 2017-18 preliminary operating capital improvement budget. Mr. Meyer.
My coffee ready. Let me get this up on the screen. Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the board. Back again. And last time, I promised I'd try to be as brief as possible on this. There are a few things that are a little bit different in this presentation than the last one. But I think all in all, there's only some minor changes to the last budget you have seen. And that comes down to debt service on the USDA Reach 3A loan. We didn't have numbers at the last opportunity or the last presentation. We do now have numbers for next year, but that has no net increase to the budget because we're bringing in revenues from the capital R&R fund to pay for it. Doesn't like this. There we go. Just a review on the revenue side. We don't see that much of an increase in revenue because, one, property tax revenues haven't grown to their potential, the things that we'd like to be able to see. Also, we just don't see that much of an increase in new connections, either in the water or sewer side. We are seeing a little bit more on the consumptive side, but, well, I guess this heat's going to help us. But it's a little too early to determine how long of a stretch the individuals are going to be using their sprinklers and such to increase our consumptive revenues. So all in all, what we're looking at is only a 0.5% increase in our total revenues. This includes the water and wastewater sales, standby fees, property tax, investment income, and hydropower. Now remember, when we look at the top 4 revenues, that's water and sewer sales, hydro, and property tax. So unless we see an increase in those, our revenues are just going to take a slightly upwards incline. That's where we're going to be challenged for several years to come. As far as other revenues, or actually I should say funding sources, we do transfer money into the general fund from other funds, mainly to pay for debt service. That's from the expansion funds, and the Fund 108 that's the BBVA 2013 refunding loan, and that one matures in September, so we'll be finished after September this year. That debt will come off the books. We also have the debt service for the UMQA loan. That's for the R&R projects. That comes in from the R&R funds. It'll increase this year because now we're starting to make principal payments on the water loan, whereas in the past it was just interest only. We also have, for new on this particular version, this proposed budget, a little under $100,000 for debt service on the USDA loan. That's the one we worked with on Reach 3A. It's a combination loan, local match, and grant. The exact debt service numbers moving out will change over time. It's just that they provide us monies in increments, advances, and they start the interest when 60 days after those advances are made. So it seems to be staggered. So we'll have a much better feel at the end of this fiscal year, I'm sorry, the end of next fiscal year, of what our annual debt service requirements are going to be, because we have taken our full allocation of the loan money, we've done our full match, and now we're into grant funds to pay for the project.
That wasn't part of that's the new number on here from the last time we saw this, right?
That is correct.
And what was the difference of why was it added to the transfers in now as opposed to earlier in the month when it wasn't?
We didn't have the numbers for the debt service on USDA.
Okay.
So now that we have the numbers, I know how much money to bring in to pay for it.
Okay.
We also have a transfer in from 108 for the $75,000 of interest, the $410,000 of one-time funds to help bridge the gap on this funding for the 17-18 budget, and that's coming from the Special Project Fund. We have $80,000 for water rights, and then $158,000 from Special Project Fund to cover the purchase of a pumper truck, a vac truck for utilities. Finally, we have an allocation of R&R funds and CIP funds to pay for staffing time for the staff that spend time on those particular projects in that area. These are the CIP projects. And we do this by employees on their time cards will put down the number of hours they have per project, so it's a direct correlation, and we have great backup as to why we're charging these funds for staff time. When you look at the expansion funds for the CIP, it's their time, engineering's time on the master plan updates, Reach 3A, now it's the inspector's time and other people's time. So we have a very solid accounting of the costs associated with that. When I talked about the debt service for the USDA, we did add this for this year, this go-round, I should say. The Reach 3A is up there, and it will mature in, it's a September of 2055. I know we talked about paying it off early. We'll see how we can go, depending upon the necessity of funding water projects ongoing out of these R&R funds. That's the only change from the prior version of this proposed budget. Capital outlay remains the same. We're funding a significant number of projects and equipment purchases and utilities to help whittle away at that backlog of vehicle replacements and equipment replacements.
Okay, that was going to be one of my questions. How are we keeping up? And obviously, you're saying we haven't kept up with replacing, because it was, what, 125,000 miles before we traded out?
Yes, and we've started last year with a big movement towards it. It takes several years. Our biggest challenge ahead of us is the state's new air quality requirements on large trucks that, Teresa, if you want a better explanation, but I believe it's in 2022, 2023 that we're going to have to swap out a lot of our large vehicles because of the higher state regulations.
Yes, it is, 2023. But we've been purchasing heavier vehicles and going with gases rather than diesel right now, so we don't have to, hopefully not have to run through this again, but yeah, all of our diesels are, 2008 to present, that's the change. So,
It's a huge cost.
it is.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Looking at our expenditure summary, the total proposed budget, or
Jeff, excuse me, if I can interrupt you for a second. You were saying that there's only been a few small changes on the operating budget, but I'm comparing the numbers that we looked at last time on the first page last time. I mean, I didn't run a tape on this, but if you look at the budget for 2017-18, starting with your operating revenues at $12,265,000, that's in agreement with the what we had before. But you get down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the ninth figure is $100,000 difference. Can you explain to me why?
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
I'm on your operating budget,
Okay.
looking at the column budget 2017-18. I'm assuming that these are all just arithmetic additions and subtractions. All of the figures seem to be the same, except that what you gave us last time, under the total operating budget, there's $18,452,000.
Yes.
And on the document that we have today, same cell, says $18,552,000.
Yes.
So I'm wondering where'd the 100,000?
That's the debt service on the USDA Reach 3 loan that's been added.
Okay, but if you get to that figure by mathematically going through this arithmetic, where does that $100,000 plug in to your formulation?
It would go under debt service increased, and the transfers in would increase.
But the debt service.
It's a line right above it.
Hmm?
It's a line right above it. So does that go up by 100?
Oh, okay, I was misreading that. I'm sorry, I was misreading that,
Okay.
little dyslexia there, 2,000,002 versus 2,000,001.
Yes,
Okay, forget I said that.
that's okay. We have decreased our overall budget from last year to this year. Debt service is a big part of that because some of our loans have come off the books, the Wallace loan and some of the others. And specifically, the BBVA loan dropped dramatically in size as far as the payment is concerned. It was originally, last year for BBVA, it was 1.8 million. For this coming year, it's 465,000. So it's just because the last year of the payments was the smallest payment of all. Plus, we only have one part of the interest payment. The way the loan was structured, the last year it was a smaller payment. So that's where a lot of our savings are coming from as far as the debt service budget is concerned. Oh, let me back up a second. One more thing, as you look at this, I just want to remind the board that under salary and benefits, even though the budget went up $570,000, a good portion of that increase was the moving of the pre-funding portion of retiree health out of services and supplies up into the individual departmental budgets. This is a view of the budget by department.
Okay, could we go back to expenditures summary?
Yes, ma'am.
Because you have, I want to talk about service and supplies, and just a couple of items in there. You have the repair and painting of the Jenny Lynn training facility.
Yes.
How long has that been going on?
We have not done it this year. It was something we wanted to do for this year, but it's going to be
Okay, well, it was
budgeted next.
thrown out, then we've been talking about that for a long time.
Not that I'm aware of.
No, this is,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're talking about the building.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yes, that building, there's going to have to be some siding done and repainted. That's been on our to-do list for quite some time.
Okay, well, that's what I was questioning, how long it's been, because in my past life, I think we talked about the.
We had done
Well, that-
some work
That was a
previously.
that was a complete construction probably 8 years ago. I mean, that's a whole, this is just maintenance.
This is a maintenance item.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar to what we're doing on some of our other
Okay,
facilities.
so
We're
it's been
doing,
done, but
fixing the
now
roof.
we're just.
Yes.
Okay. The next one was the increase in laboratory services by $50,000.
You're on the individual line item, not on the slide. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay. So
Sorry.
which page of the report?
three
Page 3.
or four.
Okay. I came prepared. On this particular one, and I'm going to defer to Teresa as
Teresa.
well, but what
Glad
they
you're
had
here,
told, what
Teresa.
she had told
Yeah.
me is there are more stringent testing regulations going on that require us to do more testing. And I'd like, Teresa, can you come up and address that, please?
Where are you getting this from?
I'm on page 3 of 4, under services, yeah.
There's several things. We have to do a lot more testing. Then comes up to every 3 years, we have lead and copper, and we have to do the entire district in lead and copper. There's more stringent, as we get new permits for our wastewater, there's added sampling that has to be done as well. So to be on the safe side, we know how much they cost, and so we try to pull it all together and make sure we have the funds for it.
Okay, so we're just anticipating the increase?
Well, yes, because we know what sampling's coming up. So,
Okay, because the story from the state is the fact that they tell you that prices are gonna go up, but they don't tell you how to test.
yes, and every so many years, EPA comes up with some new mandated testing to be required of our water system as well. And this year, we have the UCMR 4s, or the 3s.
The 4s are out, but we have long-term.
Yeah, the long-term treatment rule that is coming up on us, and we have to do testing for that. So we have to adjust our budget accordingly. And we pretty much know, and that's great for us, so we can anticipate, and it's gonna cost us this extra money. And we've gone out a couple of years ago and got quotes for lab work. And so we do have a new lab, and their prices are pretty good, so.
So we're actually gonna be coming down. That's the big one, service and supplies?
That has come down in totality. That's the roll-up for all those items you see on page 3. That is, the main component of that is moving the 600,000
The same
plus.
thing, yeah.
Same thing. It's just moving it from one category to the other. And the reason for that, and just to remind your board, is that pre-funding of retiree health for existing employees is a benefit. Just like we're putting funds away in PERS for the retirement. That's what this portion is. The portion remaining in services and supplies are costs for current retirees who are no longer part of the district, therefore it cannot be a benefit. It's actually just a cost.
Director Rendell, I think that the point about the additional testing, the lab testing is a good one, and I think, you know, we need to be very clear, I think, wherever we show this kind of cost and we state that it's a requirement, to be clear that the requirements are being imposed by state and federal law and those that regulate our permits. These are not discretionary actions that we have. These are dictated to us by other agencies who control you know, the environment in which we perform our services. And so I know that goes to the whole narrative that we need to really get the word out to the public about the cost of doing business in water and wastewater treatment and how incredibly strenuous the requirements are and the costs associated with that. And that's something Joel and I have been talking about. We're going to try to get a lot more information out about that. And this would be one example of that.
Yeah.
As permit requirements change on a year-to-year basis, you know, and just the number of tests go up, there are real dollar figures attached to that we have to find a way to cover.
yeah, it'd be nice to see it earmarked, you know, as per EPA requirement 2016 or whenever, however that stuff comes across. But I mean, I would love to be able to point to those instances like that when we start talking about other things, so.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeff, could you comment on the item right underneath that $50,000 we were just talking about, the $25,000 in lowered costs for property? Property liability and general insurance costs have gone down by, or we're anticipating them to go down. I'm gonna guess, I don't think that the costs in the insurance industry are going down, but I'm gonna guess it's more likely the loss experience of the district has gotten better. Is that?
Yes, and you're correct on that, Director Adaman. One thing I want to point out is that when you're looking at that decrease in number, it's to last 16-17 budget, not to 16-17 actuals. So I'm looking at actuals too to help predict what the future is going to be. And yes, we have seen and experienced a decrease in loss, which would in turn lowers our property insurance rates. And that is reflected here in these numbers.
And part of that was that big check we saw
Right,
that
right,
JPIA delivered, right?
Exactly, and that's directly related to that. Because that was on prior experience, but that translates into how we're looked at going forward.
Yeah, and it's all interconnected. And when you know, the presentation, the safety award to Ron Rose earlier and all of that, I mean, that's all, we're in a really good program with Aqua JPIA. I'm sure as the board knows, having attended those meetings in the board, but That was something really, really interesting to learn when I was at the Aqua Conference, was that their rates on their general liability insurance have been able to stay flat for more than a decade, and which is pretty extraordinary. And a lot of it is because of the efforts that they try to incentivize through the things like the safety programs and the fact that we, a lot of effort, like by our agency, to try to really deliver and have a good history. And so it's fortunately we have that within the Aqua JPIA, and then on top of that, we're able to have a good history within ourselves and our own performance, which is really helping.
And to point out a better history than in the past at this same district is the reason this is going down. Our management should be applauded for that.
Moving forward, we go into the department summaries. We went into detail on this at the last meeting. The only change you will see is in the non-departmental, because we added the USDA Reach 3 loan. These are the next 4 or 5 slides, and I'm not sure if you have any particular questions on these by department. The increases you see here on a number of these different departments, again, is related to that pre-funding of retiree health. So if you see large increase. The other thing I want to point out too is that this budget does not include any MOU increases other than the 1% for management and confidential. I just couldn't guess as to what was going to be part of it. I need to work on solid numbers, so it does not cover any potential increases to the SCIU MOU.
And we'll have to address that and make sure that's obviously incorporated in the final budget as presented to the board for consideration by the next meeting.
Again, we're looking at an $18.5 million budget. Board of Directors goes up slightly. We did have some decrease in services and supplies. That's where your election costs are. That was last year's, or 16-17's election costs. General management is increasing by $80,000. The majority of that is in salaries and benefits, and then we have some money for a one-time study under services and supplies.
In regards to the elections, we don't carry an amount every year, we just increase it on the 2 election years?
That is correct.
Is that typical?
It is, because that's how we also handle a lot of one-time studies. Okay. Otherwise, we'd be putting money in the budget that we wouldn't need. And I'm trying to get down to the bare bones.
Okay, so that the next time will be in the, okay, we were going 17, 18, so the next one will be the 18, 19, when we increase 4.
Yes.
Elections for 3.
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Yeah.
When we looked at the financial forecast, that financial forecast incorporates those swings, those up and downs. See, we could go down to 3 seats and not have to worry about those election costs.
Oh, you're going to ruin that one.
Whatever it takes.
Admin services, the decrease here is related to the moving of the PIO position over to water resources and general admin. Engineering, the increase here is due to the retiree health pre-funding portion. Salaries and benefits, Charles has kept his service and supplies budget with no increase. Now, most of his work, too, is project-related, so you'll see most of his costs in the R&R, project costs in the capital R&R funds and the CIP funds. This is strictly related to the general fund. Utility services is going up $533,000. They have done a great job of maintaining services and supplies, although we have to credit CPPA for dropping their rates 1 cent per kilowatt hour. That does help. We did give them a little bit more money in capital outlay and the retiree health pre-funding portion under salaries and benefits. Water resources increased quite a bit, although that's in service, our salaries and benefits. We have cut back on some of the costs we have for professional services and outside studies, because as the studies are completed, we don't fund, we'll roll them off the budget. We do have some studies in there. The Moke River update through West Point is in there, and some of the other studies in water resources, and John Mills' contract is in here as well. And that went down from 120 to 80,000. Non-departmental, you can see a big drop, but really it's reallocating costs to the other departments, and then the change in debt service. Hey, both of my departments that I take care of, we have a decrease of over $1 million.
Someone's cooking the books here.
Part of this, too, is as a result of getting new auditors in place. When they looked at our books and completed the audit, this is per their recommendations. And I think it's good recommendations. Now, here's the budget summary. We are, as a public agency, supposed to be nonprofit, and $1,142 is pretty much nonprofit. We balance revenues with expenditures, although, again, we're looking at a bridge year, and I'll get into that in just a moment. We talked about how we get into balancing the budget. We're deferring the first year payment of the admin building loan to next year, and we are going to be bringing back a resolution to address that in the budget when you adopt the budget. Because that loan schedule was adopted by resolution, we have to amend it by resolution. We also, for a one-time only, are transferring $410,000 from Special Project Fund to bridge the funding gap. Special Project Fund gets its revenue from property tax, the portion of it, 15% overall. And I'd like to discuss that towards the end of this presentation to gain some direction on moving forward. We're going to be coming back in July with a presentation on FERC relicensing, and we're going to need to have a funding source for that. Some of the ongoing issues, I'll jump right into it. As I mentioned previously, we're all aware of it. We just don't have a significant number of new connections. It's not like it was in the early 2000s when we were getting 400 new connections a year. I was trying to be a little cute in how I phrased the next bullet. Basically, looking at states' ongoing efforts to implement permanent one-size-fits-all water efficiency. I got other terms for it. But that is going to be a challenge for us. And what that does, it takes away our ability to accurately predict future revenues on the water side, especially the consumptive side. So one of the things we're going to be looking at is how can we get a predictable revenue source so we don't have these dramatic up and downs, which we have to react to. I've been in government for 20 years, and there's always swings in the budget cycles, whether it's on the state side, which trickles down to the county, when you see differences in sales tax, property tax. It's much better if you can get a more predictable level of revenues. Then you can adjust to it and be able to set up your organization to meet your needs and the funding levels. So that's one of the goals we'd like to do as we look over this next year, is how to make sure we have a more predictable revenues so we can right-size our organization to those revenues.
One of the things that I'd like to add is the fact that I think it's very healthy that we're conducting our meetings with the county. Because if there's going to be any projection of how trickle down it's going to come, to CCWD, the county is going to be the source. And so I think that's, as I say, that's a very healthy move for us to have undertaken, and I appreciate that.
PERS costs will continue to rise. A lot of that is a direct result of the change in the discount rate, which will increase our contribution rates over the next 7 years. And then there'll be other cost increases associated with PERS. Retiree health costs have gone up. It's jumped about $80,000 from 16-17 to 17-18. We are due to have another valuation done the end of this year. Due to the new rules on GASB, we used to have our valuations done every 3 years. They're changing it now to every 2 years. So we will be contracting out with Nicolay and Associates again to update our valuation, and we'll be doing that once our audit is done. And they'll be completing that in November, December timeframe. So we'll have new numbers. Our costs, our budget for the pre-funding portion comes directly from that valuation. And of course, we're going to have to find a sustainable source for funding the loan repayment for this building. This is no secret. We've got to look at the funding gap of the sewer operating fund. We had HDR here recently. It got us to thinking, and talking to HDR, to Sean Korn, and to Tom Gould, and then really going back and looking at the numbers. I'm going back and sifting through everything that we have that's incorporated in that presentation they made, including all the assumptions of how we allocate water and sewer costs, right down to how we allocate salary and benefit costs for all the employees, in particular in utilities, because some of them work on the sewer, some work water, and some combination. So I'm trying to make sure that no stone is unturned so we can get the numbers, and hopefully, there's no guarantee, but maybe through that process, just looking at how we allocate costs can shrink some of that gap.
Yeah, and it's important to note that Jeff was informing, some of those numbers have not been analyzed for over a decade. So, you know, it's a really important time with this 5-year study that we're doing. I mean, it couldn't have been more timely to do this, to really take a look at some of the things that we've relied upon, but we really haven't looked at for a long time. And just like our master planning process, you know, it seems like all of these assumptions we need to go through, make sure they're really based on the best information we have, and we're comfortable with those. And so it's a good opportunity. And so, you know, between presentations on draft and final report, there'll be a lot of work happening behind the scenes to do that validation.
Unfortunately, Director Strange isn't here because I was going to use this as a bridge to talk to him about the West Point Wilseyville consolidation project that we want to get. We're trying desperately to get funding from the state on this, and it comes down to debt service coverage. We're fine in the water fund, but the sewer fund, it's basically a break even. So through this whole financial analysis process and the way we're looking at this, that's one of my top goals, is to make us available to get 100% funding for that project.
Okay.
Yes. We need it for other things as well, to be honest with you. It's not just that project, in case there's any other sewer needs out there.
Well, depending on how people vote in the future will depend on how far I'm going to get behind that project.
Okay.
That's all I'll say.
We need to provide reliable funding for future R&R projects in both funds. And the last item is need sustainable long-term funding source for both New Hogan and North Fork. Talking to Peter Martin last week, the relicensing for New Hogan is also due in 2032. So we'll have two projects running concurrently. However, he assured me that the costs associated with New Hogan are not going to be as great as the North Fork. But we still have to work on that. And talking to Dave yesterday, what we'd like to be able to do is bring back an item for your board to review those processes and get some direction on how we're going to move forward in providing sustainable funding. And it could very well be, you know, some of those property tax money starting in 1819. But one of the things we'd like to talk about is actually creating a reserve for FERC relicensing. I talked about a reserve for North Fork, but we're just going to drop North Fork and say FERC relicensing. So we have it available for both.
Yeah.
This is some of the language, my attempt at drafting some language for the reserve. I won't go into it in detail right now, but if you could look this over and so if there's any suggestions, because we're going to be coming back in July when we look at this, I think July or sometime in August, I would like to, at that time, once we have that presentation, have your board adopt our policies to include a new reserve, and that's a FERC reserve. The R&R projects and the CIP projects has not changed from the last time we talked. So unless you have any questions to talk to about in detail, I'm not going to go. I was not going to go into detail on the CIPs because your board adopted the 5-year CIP. This is what was an extension of that, and it has not changed since the last 2 times I presented this to you.
Seeing none?
One thing I do want to point out, and it's just a message that came across in the HDR, is we have more projects in both sewer and water than we do funding. So it's all going to be a matter of timing. If we're showing negatives, this is just based on the budget. We may have to postpone or stretch out projects. It's not going to be we're going to build projects when we have no money for them. What we're looking at for is this year as far as budgeting is concerned. And the overall budget for this year is $10,667,000 for combined water and sewer. And finally, wrapping this up, if there's any comments or questions or things you wanted to have changed into the budget, I can make it. We'll be coming back to you on June 28th to pass not only the operating CIP budgets, but the personnel allocation as well. It has not changed from the last time you updated about a month ago when Dave brought it forward to you. And we're also going to request that you approve a new resolution that will amend Resolution 2012, which approved the internal loan for the admin building fund. I'll be requesting that you just postpone the principal payment for 1 year. And finally, we'll come back in July, late July or early August to talk about the FERC relicensing reserve and the associated projects and efforts that we're going to come before us. With that, that's my presentation, and I'm open for questions or comments.
Any questions or comments by the board?
I have a question. Okay, so coming back to the end of your presentation, I'm looking at water capital R&R and wastewater capital R&R. Between the two of them, that's $1.3 million?
Oh, you're talking about the red numbers?
I'm
Yeah,
combining them.
and that's projected at the end of fiscal year 1920. That's where I was referring to, that if we find out we don't have enough money, we'll push those projects out, because some of them start at different times as far as planning, design, and construction, and we can always push out the construction side after we go through planning and design to match cash flow.
Yeah, because I'm sure, you know, Teresa and her staff are constantly looking at these CIP water projects and saying,
Yes.
well, maybe I can do this, or maybe I can do that, so that we can chip away at it, because we don't have the money. That's basically what it is.
You're correct, Director Underhill, and Charles looks at this constantly as well, and that's where we're going to really look at cash flow. And obviously, when this rate was, the R&R process was adopted in the rate structure, we knew that there was a significant backlog in projects, and that
Right, right.
that will always stay there. Now, some of these funds, as you see here under the wastewater, that's Pond 6 expansion, as well as some of the projects in copper. So maybe there's some adjustments on time frame. I know Teresa and Charles have been meeting with the state regarding that issue. So that's an evolving process.
And of course, grants are a part of the equation as well, and could affect the timing of these projects depending upon what is available and what we can obtain. One of the things that now we're trying to be more focused and kind of centralized, organized around the collective pursuit of grants, and how we do that, with Joel's taking that responsibility in grants management. We are going to, I've been talking to him about the fact that I'd like to start coming to the board on a periodic basis with an update on our efforts on grants, just to check in and give you a status report as part of that, because I think it's one of the things that, as the board adopts the CIP plan and you see this information with the budget cycle, there are some things like the pursuit of grants that continue throughout the year that I think we need to come back and check in and give you some more information on that. Because, as we've talked about, we try to be very conservative in what we project, just knowing that, we have the intention to pursue grants, but a lot of it we don't know until we actually have it in hand. And I'd like to keep you informed as to what the progress is on that. We do have some opportunity, I think, to go after some of the grants around the hazard mitigation that potentially could affect this with the replacement of more of our redwood tanks that are out there, so like the projects we just completed in Big Trees. So those kind of things I want to get back to and get information to you about that and get into the public as well.
Anything? Oh, good.
So we're going to see you again for the same information essentially on the 28th.
Same information on the 28th, yes.
But we talked about the possibility of the MOU affecting personnel costs, so those adjustments perhaps will be made?
It all depends on your board approving the MOU prior to me presenting the budget.
Okay.
Yeah, and Director Thomas, as you well know, we've been in negotiations with the SEIU representatives for a long period of time, a number of months, on that for the next contract, given that our current contract expires at the end of this budget year. And I think at our next meeting, regular meeting of this board, we will be asking the board to take action on approving the next contract. And as part of that, we can calculate the fiscal aspects of that into the budget, and that'll be included within the final budget. But that's been an evolving process that, again, like Jeff was saying, we didn't want to presume the outcome of it, but we will have the information that we need, and the adoption of the budget would be taken after an action on the contract itself, so that you would know, exactly what the final amount is. And again, we will have all that information prepared as part of our agenda report and everything too. And I realize it's kind of we'd like to have had more certainty as we move through this. It's kind of a fluid situation, but that's just the nature of labor negotiations, and we've all worked very hard across the board with employees as well to get to the finish of this, and I think the outcome will be a very good one, but we've needed every bit of time that we've had to get to that point, and we'll bring all that information forward.
And just as a note of caution, the agenda, I believe, goes out Thursday or Friday, and it'll be a similar packet as what you see. And unless your board adopts this in open session, if there's an accepted agreement, the numbers that go out in the board packet will be the same as you have here.
Okay.
If there's an agreement that's approved, I will present that to you during the board meeting next week.
I understand.
Or whenever if it doesn't happen in that particular time frame, we'll just adopt a change to the budget whenever that comes about, correct?
Yes. So we all, it's just a procedural thing. And you just kind of have to do the steps in a certain order because I want to make sure that we accurately portray. And right now, I don't have the accurate numbers because the MOU has not been approved by your board. So once I have that approval, then I can incorporate a published amount.
I think we all understand.
Yeah.
I just have one more question, and that's the fact that, and you and I we've talked about this in open session about budgets, and the fact that it seems that we're always moving something from one category to the other. That's why we're, have great big fluctuations. A new auditor comes in and says, this is where it should go. And we agree, yeah, this is where it should go. And we do this all the time, Jeff.
I would say, in this particular case, we probably moved 4 items. And some of it was for more clarity. Yes, the auditors had us move 2 items, the PERS side fund loan and the pre-funding. One of the things we decided to do is to identify tool costs. It used to be under material and supplies. So for us to be able to identify how much we're spending on tools, we created a new category. So that for us is I don't want to say tracking tool, but it's a management tool so that we can have better information to make better informed decisions.
Yeah, it seems more appropriate to have that separated out.
Yes. So yes, the thing you kind of look at is when I know it makes it difficult when you see negatives in one area and such, but I think overall too, when you see some drops like that, we're always reevaluating all our costs.
All right, then we'll just continue.
Is there anything else by the board?
No, thank you, Jeff.
Anything
Thank you.
from the public? Okay, where does that take us?
Board reports.
Okay, we'll move on to, anything else? Dave, you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I don't. I just want to thank Jeff for all his work on this, Patty as well, and the other finance staff, and then across the board, Teresa, Charles, everybody else who had a hand in this and keeping costs down. And really, there were a lot of things that were left on the cutting table, that things that would have been great to have, but realizing the fiscal challenges, we just had to come in with the numbers that we did, and I appreciate their effort in doing that. I know that means that they had to make some tough decisions.
Well, I just want to say, I appreciate the direction we're headed in, evaluating our staff time and how it's allocated. I still think we are, particularly in the field, that we're a few people short. So, I'm reluctant, but I also recognize the shape that we're in, and, maybe we have to put that off. So, I just think this budget basically, it seems like it's going to increase everybody's workload, because there's still a lot of work to be done by the same amount of people, and I just think we're short a few people. But I just don't know how we go about, remedying that right now. So that's my comment on that. Okay, so then board reports, Director Underhill?
Well, last night I attended a White Pines Park Committee with Joel, and our District 3 supervisor was there. He chose White Pines Park over Tom McClintock, which I thought was very interesting, talking about the funding from the county.
Makes perfect sense to me. Tom McClintock isn't going to vote for him.
Anyway, it was a very interesting meeting, and we'll be hearing final word out of the county after they meet on Tuesday as far as the funding is concerned. They did receive FEMA funding, and you know what that means, a match for the county, so we're very pleased with that. And that's about all I did up the hill, except stay cooler than you guys down here.
Director Thomas?
How about your bridge? Any movement
That's what she's talking about.
Well, that's what I was talking about, yeah.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
but actual construction, do you have any
Oh,
projections for that?
the county is still making their decisions.
Okay, all right. I had the distinct pleasure of going to Stockton to attend the first meeting of that SIGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act for the East San Joaquin County. There are, as you remember, the participation that we formed with Stanislaus County and Calaveras County and the Rock Creek District, and we all stood up and took an oath to do our best job for God and country and for water.
Blood initiation?
Yeah, the initiation. There was an election. It turned out to be a kind of an interesting dynamic there. There was one general manager of a water district that said that his board of directors hadn't really finalized did all their paperwork, so that he wanted to postpone the election until they could recommend somebody to be president. And so they elected an interim president, which I think was a wise choice, a guy named Chuck Wynn, Supervisor Chuck Wynn. And I didn't realize that before I went to this meeting, how long that San Joaquin County has been in this game. I mean, they've been notably in severe overdraft of their groundwater basin down there. So it seems like to me that they have been working on this. Is Peter still here? He took off. But Peter has been attending meetings down there with those folks for a number of months now. I didn't realize how much background that had gone into this before I arrived. But we're trying to set up a meeting where we would have our counterparts from our sub-basin, the Stanislaus County representatives and Don Hopper from the Rock Creek group, and just to get together. And I wanted to mention that there's a Walt Ward, who is a hydrogeologist working for Stanislaus County. That's he is the designated alternate in case I can't make it to a meeting. And it's going to be pretty difficult to make it to meetings because their meetings are scheduled for the same mornings that our board meetings are scheduled. So I was asking.
Well, you'll have to make that request, change that.
For them to change
Yeah.
theirs? Yeah, well, I expected that to be discussed, but Peter said that they got off on some tangent and didn't get a chance to bring that forward. But anyway, I'm happy that we're gonna be involved in all that. It'll, they summarize the consequences of not being involved and not doing a good job is that the state would do it for us, so that's the bottom line.
That's the threat that they always try to throw out, but I don't really see the state doing a whole lot.
Exactly.
Well, they always wanna try to do a grab on
Well, yeah.
if they need water to do something.
Well, they'll do that part, that's for sure. Anything else?
No. Oh, I will be attending the Tuolumne Stanislaus, the T-stand meeting tomorrow in Sonora.
Director Adaman.
Speaking of tomorrow, yeah, and glad to hear about that, Russ. I do want to comment, I think it is important that we see if we can get that meeting changed, the time changed, so that we're, I mean, Peter hasn't been to any of our meetings here, but that can't go with you. You should be at both meetings, and that is, that Groundwater Sustainability Act is an important thing to be paying attention. I hope they do accommodate us.
Okay.
Speaking of tomorrow, we have a camera meeting here in this room at 2:30, the camera, the Calaveras Amador McClellan River Association. And I think, and are we having our meeting with Board of Supervisors on Monday? Has that been confirmed? It is the 3rd. Do we know?
It's on unless it's off.
Okay, it's on the.
It's on calendar, and I'll be circulating later today a
Okay.
request for agenda items.
All right, meeting with the Board of Supervisors on Monday, the 26th, the chair and vice chair. And there was one other. On that's all I got.
What time is do we know what time that's gonna be? The board, be a board suit?
10:30. Traditionally, historically.
It's a long history.
Yeah. Okay, I have nothing to report. Next board meeting be June 28th, 2017, 9 a.m. We will adjourn into closed session conference with labor negotiators. Is there any public comment on closed session? Okay, we will adjourn to closed session.
There's a windshield out there that's reflecting the sunlight, it's burning a hole in the highway. See anything in the back of the road? Isn't there a auto electric shop over there in Las Vegas you can pull that trailer over?
No, I'll probably take it down to Lodi.